The battlefield was silent after the storm of fire. Ships burned in the black sky above and broken armor lay scattered across the ground. The alien warrior stood tall in her steel plates, her breathing heavy behind the helmet. For years she had been called unbreakable, the blade of her people, the terror of her enemies. Her armor was not only protection, it was her pride, her shield and her prison. Across the ruins stood a single human, blood on his cheek, clothes torn, yet his eyes steady. He was no soldier, no general. Just one man who refused to run. The warrior raised her weapon, but something inside her paused. Why did this human not tremble like the others? Why did he not beg for his life instead? He looked at her as if she was more than the monster her people had made her. The weight of years pressed down on her chest, every battle, every scar, every scream of those she had cut down, echoed in her mind. Her armor felt heavier than ever. It was not only metal, it was chains. And in that moment she did something no one had ever seen before. She placed her weapon on the ground. Her trembling hands unlocked the seals on her chest plate. With a hiss, the plates opened, revealing pale skin marked by scars that ran across her body. Her face, once hidden, was now bare to the night air. Her silver eyes glowed faintly, filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. The human did not move closer. He did not draw a blade. He simply stood, watching her as if she was not an enemy. But a person, her people, would call it weakness. Her commanders would call it betrayal. But to this human it was something else. "You're not afraid," she said in a low voice, her words rough from years of silence. The human shook his head slowly. "Afraid? Yes," he admitted. "But not of you. I'm afraid of what they've done to you." His voice was calm, steady like a hand reaching out in the dark. Her heart, hardened by war, stumbled at those words. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever looked past the armor. She lowered her gaze, ashamed of the scars that told too many stories. But the human's eyes never left her, not in disgust, not in pity, but in quiet respect. The ground around them was filled with smoke and fire. The ruins of ships lit the horizon like dying stars. Yet in that chaos there was a strange stillness. It felt as if the galaxy itself had paused to watch this moment. The meeting of steel and flesh, of pride and trust. She thought of her oath to the Empire, her vow to fight until she was nothing but ash. But now, standing bare before a human, she felt a new kind of battle begin. A war inside her heart, between loyalty and something she did not yet understand. The human took a slow step forward, careful not to startle her. "If you wanted to kill me, you would have already done it," he said softly. "You don't need the armor to prove who you are." The words hit her harder than any blade, because deep down she knew he was right. Her whole life, she had been told she was only as strong as her armor, only as valuable as her victories, but now, stripped of her shield, she saw a reflection in the human's eyes. Not a weapon, not a monster, but someone who could choose a different path. The stars burned above, silent witnesses to this impossible meeting. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the night air touch her bare skin. For the first time in years she felt the cold, felt alive, felt free. And though she did not yet understand why, she knew this moment was the beginning of something far greater than herself. The human held out a hand, not as an order, not as a command, but as an invitation. A bridge between two worlds that had never trusted each other. Her fingers trembled as she stared at that hand. If she took it, there would be no turning back. If she refused, she would remain the Empire's chained blade forever. The silence stretched, heavier than the weight of all her battles. And then, with a slow breath, she reached forward. Her scarred hand touched his, flesh meeting flesh. It was not the strike of an enemy, nor the grip of a soldier. It was the first bond of trust. Born in fire and silence far away, the galaxy turned as always, but here in the ruins of war, a story had begun that would one day change the stars forever. The night stretched on, the fires of battle slowly dying. The alien warrior stood without her armor, her body bare to the cold air. The human still held her hand steady and calm, as if to remind her that she was no longer alone. For years she had carried her scars in silence, hidden beneath layers of steel. But now, under the pale light of broken moons, her secrets were open for another to see. The human's eyes moved across the lines carved into her skin. Each scar told a story, one of betrayal, of battles, of punishments no soldier should endure, he wanted to ask. But he knew questions could cut deeper than blades. So he only said, "You've carried too much." More than anyone should. His words were soft, yet they pressed against her like the weight of truth. Her voice trembled, though she hated to show weakness. "These marks," she whispered, touching one that stretched across her ribs. "They are not victories. They are chains." She had been raised to believe scars were honor, proof of loyalty to her empire, but each one reminded her of pain, of orders followed without question. And now, with her armor gone, she feared he would see her as broken. But the human shook his head. "Scars are not chains," he said. "They are survival. Proof that you stood against everything meant to destroy you." She blinked at him, confusion flickering in her silver eyes. No commander had ever spoken like that. No soldier had ever cared. In his gaze she saw no judgment, only a strange kind of respect she could not explain. The silence between them was heavy, filled with things unspoken. The warrior had never trusted anyone with her truth, not even her own people. To show her face, to reveal her body, was considered shameful in her culture. Armor was everything. Without it, she was nothing. Yet this human stood before her as if she was more than the plates she had cast aside. She turned away, ashamed of the tremble in her hands. "You should not look at me like that," she said, her voice rough. "If your people saw you with me, they would call you a traitor." The human gave a small, tired smile. "Maybe," he admitted, "but I've been called worse things for much less." There was humor in his tone, light but brave, and it cracked the wall inside her chest just a little. She lowered herself to sit on the ruins of a broken stone wall. The human joined her, sitting close but not too close. Giving her space above them, the night sky shimmered with stars, some bright, some fading. Her people believed every star was a warrior's spirit. But tonight she wondered if some stars were watching in silence. Waiting for change, the human finally asked carefully, "Why do you fight for them if they leave you scarred like this?" She stiffened at the question, her fingers curling. For a long moment she did not answer. Then finally she said, "Because I was told I had no choice. Because the Empire said my life belonged to them the day I was born." Her voice grew darker as memories spilled out. "They trained us as children, they broke us, rebuilt us, chained us to the armor until we believed we were nothing without it." Her eyes glistened as she looked at the scars on her arms. "They told us scars were medals, but really they were reminders of how much they owned us." Her tone cracked, and she hated the sound of it. The human's hand twitched, as if he wanted to reach for her, but he stayed still. It was her choice, not his, and slowly she turned her face toward him. "You see me without armor, and you do not laugh. You do not fear," she said quietly. "Why?" The human looked at her as if the answer was simple. "Because you are not a weapon to me, you're a person." Those words struck harder than any blow. Her people had always seen her as a weapon, a tool, a blade with no soul. Yet here stood a human who dared to say she was more. Her breath shook as she tried to understand what it meant. Her entire life had been built on obedience, on silence, on chains she could never break. The night wind brushed her skin, cold and raw, but it felt strangely alive. She realized she was not hiding anymore. For the first time, she was being seen, not as the Empire's warrior, not as the galaxy's terror, but as herself. It terrified her, yet it also filled her with a strange fire she could not name. She turned her eyes back to the stars, her voice softer now. "If I let them know I lowered my armor, if I let them know I showed myself to a human, they will kill me." The human met her gaze without flinching. "Then let them try," he said firmly, "because I won't let them." There was no hesitation in his voice, only certainty. For the first time, she felt her chains crack, even if only a little. The secrets she carried beneath the plates were no longer hers alone. And though fear whispered in her heart, another voice had begun to rise, a voice that said maybe, just maybe, she could choose a path beyond scars and steel, and with the human beside her, that path no longer seemed impossible. The fires of war still burned across the horizon, but here, sitting side by side in the ruins, two souls had begun something far greater. Not a battle of weapons, but a rebellion of trust, and trust once born could spread like wildfire across the stars. The morning came with smoke still hanging in the sky. The battlefield was quiet, but silence was never true silence. Somewhere in the ruins, survivors hid, soldiers searched, and spies watched, and among them whispers began to spread, carried like fire through dry grass. They said the unbreakable warrior had lowered her armor. They said she had shown her face, her scars. To a human of all beings, at first it sounded like madness, impossible. A lie made by desperate slaves, but the more it was spoken, the more it began to take shape as truth. Every rumor was a spark, and sparks could burn an empire. The warrior herself felt the weight of it pressing down on her chest. She had not meant to start anything. She had only wanted, for one moment, to breathe without steel crushing her skin. But now, her choice had become something dangerous, something that could not be undone. Beside her, the human remained calm. He moved through the ruins with quiet strength. Where others saw broken walls, he saw paths. Where others saw ashes, he saw places to begin again. It unsettled her. How could someone without armor walk with such certainty? "Do you realize what they are saying about you?" she asked him. Her voice low and tense, the human nodded slowly. "Yes, and let them talk." She shook her head. Frustration breaking through. "No, you don't understand. Whispers are more deadly than blades. The Empire will hear, and they will come." But the human only answered, "Then we'll be ready." That simple confidence lit something inside her. For so long she had lived by fear, fear of disobedience, fear of failure, fear of chains, yet this human seemed to walk unafraid, as if the weight of the Empire was nothing. She envied that courage, and at the same time, she wanted to understand it. As the day stretched on, more survivors found them, not warriors, not commanders, but broken slaves, deserters, and those left behind. They came because they had heard the rumor. They wanted to see if it was true, if the strongest warrior of the Empire had truly stood bare before a human. And when they saw her without her armor, their eyes widened. At first there was fear, then confusion, then something else. Hope. A small alien child, thin and trembling, whispered to his mother, "If she can do it, maybe we can too." The mother hushed him, but her own eyes flickered with the same dangerous thought. Hope was spreading even in silence. The warrior felt their stares like arrows. She wanted to shout at them, to tell them this was no rebellion, no plan, but deep inside she knew the truth. Her small act had already lit the fuse. The fire was no longer hers to control. Later, as night fell, she sat beside the human near the broken husk of a fallen ship. Her voice was heavy, thick with unease. "I never meant to lead anyone. I never meant to begin this." The human glanced at her, his eyes steady. "Sometimes the greatest rebellions don't begin with plans," he said. "They begin with truth." Her chest tightened, the words digging into her like blades. Was it true? Had she become something more than a soldier? The thought frightened her, yet it also stirred something fierce. For years, she had fought battles that were not hers, but maybe, just maybe, this one could be. The following days proved her fears right. Messengers and deserters carried the story across systems in slave camps. Whispers rose. She lowered her armor before a human. In barracks, soldiers grumbled, wondering if their strongest warrior was no longer loyal. The Empire itself began to feel the tremor. Small but growing, commanders sent hunters to find her. But the harder they searched, the stronger the whispers became. Every failure to capture her only made the legend greater. The warrior who had chosen trust over chains. The warrior who had looked at a human and seen something worth risking everything. One night, a group of escaped slaves gathered near the ruins where she hid. Their voices trembled as they begged, "Lead us. Show us how to break free." Her throat tightened. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to tell them she was no leader, no savior, only a broken blade. But then she saw the human watching her, silent, waiting. His eyes did not command her, but they reminded her. He had seen her without armor and still stood by her. He believed she was more than a weapon, and maybe, if even one human could believe that, then others could too. Her heart battled itself in the dark. She was terrified of failing them, terrified of being crushed by the Empire's wrath. But deeper still, she felt something burning. Not fear, not shame, but defiance. And defiance, once lit, was hard to kill. She stood before the small crowd, her silver eyes glowing faintly in the firelight. Her voice shook, but it carried. "I am no savior, I am no queen. I am only a soldier who is tired of chains." The crowd listened in silence, holding their breath. "But if you want freedom, then stand with me, and I will fight with you." The words were not planned, they rose like fire from her chest. The people bowed their heads, not in fear, but in respect, and the whispers of rebellion became louder that night. No longer just rumor, no longer just hope, but the first cries of a storm that would one day shake the stars. The Empire did not take long to answer the whispers. Their spies had seen too much. Their hunters had failed too often, and now they sent messages to every stronghold, to every garrison. The order was clear: bring back the warrior, dead or alive. The loyalty of their greatest weapon was in question, and that could not be allowed. The warrior knew it was coming. She could feel the Empire's gaze pressing down from across the stars. She had seen it before. Those who questioned, those who wavered, were crushed quickly. But this time was different, because now the Empire's chains were around her own throat, and she could no longer pretend they were not there. Her people confronted her first, soldiers who had once fought beside her. They found her in the ruins with the human at her side. Their weapons glowed in the dark, their eyes sharp with suspicion. "Why are you here?" one demanded. "Why do you hide among slaves and deserters?" Another sneered. "Is it true? You lowered your armor before a human." Her chest tightened, shame and rage colliding inside her. She had always been taught that loyalty meant silence, that obedience was strength. But standing there, surrounded by her own kind, she realized something new. Loyalty was only another word for chains. The human stepped forward. Though unarmed, "Leave her," he said, his voice calm but firm. The soldiers laughed, their fangs flashing. "A human dares to speak," one snarled. "Do you not see, warrior? He poisons you with weakness." But the warrior's hand rose, stopping them, her voice low but sharp. "He has shown me more strength than the Empire ever did." The words hung heavy in the air. The soldiers froze, shocked. Never before had she spoken against the Empire. Never before had she questioned, and now, before their eyes, she was breaking the chains that bound her. Piece by piece, word by word, the leader of the squad stepped closer, his blade ready. "You swore an oath," he growled. "You swore your life to the Empire." Her silver eyes burned as she met his gaze. "No," she said firmly. "I swore because they gave me no choice. I wore their chains because they forced them on me. But now I choose." She raised her scarred hands, her voice stronger. "And I will not choose them." The silence that followed felt like thunder. The soldiers' loyalty cracked in that moment. Some lowered their weapons, unsure. Others gripped their blades tighter, desperate to hold on to the order they had always known. And deep within, the Empire trembled, because even one soldier questioning was enough to spread doubt like fire. The human watched quietly, his heart pounding. He knew the danger. He knew they could all be killed. But he also knew this was more than a fight. This was a turning point. The moment the warrior's chains truly began to break, the soldiers argued among themselves, voices sharp and angry. "She is lost. The Empire will destroy her," one hissed. Another shook his head, his hands trembling. "Or maybe she has seen what we refuse to see." Their eyes flickered between her scars and the calm figure of the human. And slowly, doubt spread through them like cracks in stone. The warrior stepped forward, her voice rising. "You think loyalty will save you, but loyalty is what keeps you chained. Every scar you carry is not your own, it belongs to them, to the Empire that feeds on your obedience." She spread her arms, showing the lines cut deep into her flesh. "Look at me. This is what loyalty gave me: pain, silence. Nothing more." Her words struck like fire, burning the silence. Even the strongest soldier could not look away from the truth carved into her skin. For a moment no one spoke, no one moved, and then one soldier lowered his blade, his eyes wet. "No more chains," he whispered. Barely loud enough to hear, but the whisper was enough. It broke the air open like thunder. Others followed, some dropping their weapons, others stepping back in fear. Not all would betray the Empire. Not yet, but the seed had been planted. The chains of loyalty had begun to crack, and once cracks appeared, the Empire could never make them whole again. The leader growled in fury, charging forward, his blade aimed at the human, seeing him as the infection that had poisoned their warrior. But before steel could strike flesh, the warrior moved, her hand caught his arm. Her strength breaking through with a single sharp motion, she disarmed him and sent him crashing to the ground. The soldiers gasped, torn between fear and awe. The warrior stood over him, her chest heaving. "You think the human is weakness," she said coldly. "But it is you who are weak, chained to an empire that will never love you, never save you." Her words echoed in the ruins, louder than the clash of weapons, and in that moment her choice was clear to all. The soldiers retreated, divided and shaken. Some swore they would return with reinforcements. Others looked at her with eyes that no longer held obedience. But questions and questions were more dangerous than blades. For once questions began, empires began to fall. The human came to her side, his voice quiet. "You broke their chains," he said. She shook her head, her voice low but fierce. "No, not yet, but I showed them the cracks. And cracks will spread." Her silver eyes lifted to the stars, burning bright. "And soon, the Empire will learn what it means to lose control." The Empire answered with fire. It began with a fleet, black ships cutting across the night sky like blades. They came not for negotiation, not for mercy, but for one purpose: to crush the whispers before they became flames, to silence the warrior who had dared to choose trust over chains. The ground trembled as the ships descended. Columns of smoke rose as engines roared. The people hiding in the ruins looked up in terror. They had seen the Empire's punishment before. Entire worlds burned simply to remind others of obedience. The warrior stood at the edge of the broken wall. Her eyes followed the shadows moving across the stars. She knew this was not a hunt anymore, it was war. And this time she was not fighting alone. Beside her stood the human, unarmored yet unshaken. "They are coming for me," she said, her voice low. The human shook his head. "No. They're coming for all of us now." She felt her chest tighten, the weight of guilt heavy, but the human's voice cut through. Steady and strong. "Then we fight not as slaves, not as soldiers of an empire, but as people who choose to be free." Those words lit something inside her. For so long she had fought because she was told to. Now for the first time she would fight because she chose to. And that choice made her stronger than any armor ever had. Her scars no longer felt like chains, but like marks of survival. The first strike came from above. Flames rained down as plasma tore through the ruins. Walls shattered, fire spread. Screams echoed through the dust. The warrior roared, her voice carrying over the chaos. "Stand with me, fight with me, the deserters." The slaves, the broken soldiers, they rose. Some carried stolen rifles, others held nothing but stones and steel scraps. Yet all of them carried the same fire in their hearts. The rebellion that had begun with a whisper was now shouting in the dark. And the Empire's fleet had no idea what storm it had unleashed. The warrior led the charge through the burning streets. She tore through enemy soldiers with her bare hands. Her strength was no longer the Empire's weapon. It was her own. The human fought beside her, clever and quick. He had no armor, no glowing blade, but he used every piece of ruin, every spark of wit. When enemy troops poured into the streets, he pulled wires from broken engines, turning wreckage into traps. Explosions rocked the ground, scattering soldiers. The people saw this and shouted his name. For the first time they saw a human not as prey, but as a fighter who turned weakness into strength. Together, they became something the Empire could not understand. A warrior who had broken her chains, and a human who inspired others to fight without fear. Side by side, they lit the ruins with defiance, and defiance spread faster than fire. But the Empire was vast, and its wrath was endless. More ships descended, more soldiers filled the streets. The night sky became a storm of fire. The stars above flickered, hidden by smoke, and still, the warrior fought, her silver eyes burning. In the middle of battle, she saw soldiers she once called brothers. Their weapons trembled as they faced her. She shouted above the clash of blades, "Look at me! See what loyalty has given you, scars, chains." Nothing more. Some lowered their guns. Others turned away. The chains of loyalty cracked again. Louder this time. The human's voice carried too. "To fight for the Empire is to fight for your prison. To fight with us is to fight for your freedom." The words struck deep, because they were not orders, they were choices. And choices were something the Empire feared most. Soldiers hesitated, and hesitation spread like fire in dry fields. The battle raged until the ground itself seemed ready to split. Fires painted the night red. Screams and shouts rose into the smoke. The warrior and the human fought back to back. Their movements no longer separate, but one rhythm, one heartbeat. They were no longer just surviving. They were changing the war itself. In the chaos, the Empire's commander descended. A towering figure clad in black armor. His voice thundered across the battlefield. "You are nothing without us. Warrior, put on your armor, return to your chains, and I will spare these people." The warrior's chest heaved, her scars burning under his gaze. But this time she did not bow, she did not tremble. She raised her voice so all could hear. "My armor was never my strength, it was my prison." She stepped forward, silver eyes blazing. "And I will never wear chains again." The people roared, their cries rising like thunder. The commander's blade flashed, and the duel began. Steel clashed with fire. Sparks lit the night. The warrior fought with fury born not of obedience, but of choice, and behind her, the human rallied the others, keeping the line unbroken. The Empire thought it would crush whispers with fire. But instead it had given birth to a storm, and in the burning night the rebellion had truly begun. Not just in one ruined city, not just among slaves and deserters, but in the hearts of all who saw the fire in the stars. The city was still burning when the dawn came. Smoke rose into the sky like black rivers. Hiding the stars, bodies lay in the streets, both friend and foe, and though the warrior and the human still stood, their battle was far from over. The Empire had not been defeated. The commander she struck down was only one of many. For every chain that broke, the Empire would forge another, and now, both she and the human had become marked, hunted not only by soldiers but by betrayal itself. The deserters and slaves who had followed them were scattered, some too frightened to stay, some too wounded to go on. Whispers of rebellion were still spreading, but so were whispers of fear. Not everyone who heard their story wanted to be free. Some wanted safety, some wanted the Empire's mercy, and some wanted rewards for turning them in. The warrior felt the weight of it crushing her chest. She had led people into fire, and many had died. Every scream still echoed in her ears. Her scars burned as if reminding her that every choice had a cost. And now, her choice to trust had painted a target across all their backs. The human noticed her silence as they hid in the ruins of an old tower. "You're blaming yourself again," he said softly. She turned away, her jaw tight. "They followed me, and they burned for it. If I had stayed in chains, they would still live." Her voice cracked, and she hated the weakness in it. The human shook his head, his eyes steady. "They were already burning long before you chose. They were burning under the Empire's chains. Only slower, only quieter." He leaned closer, his voice fierce. "You gave them a chance to fight, and that is worth more than chains." Her chest ached at his words. She wanted to believe him, but doubt was a shadow that refused to leave. And soon the shadow grew heavier, because betrayal came closer than she had ever expected. That night, as they rested among the rubble, one of the deserters they had saved returned. His voice was urgent, his face full of fear. "They know where you are," he whispered. "The Empire is moving this way. You must flee." The warrior's eyes narrowed. Something in his voice was wrong. The human saw it too, the way the man avoided her eyes. The way his hands shook not from fear, but from guilt, and before she could speak, the air trembled, lights flared in the distance, boots thundered on the ground. It was a trap. The deserter fell to his knees, weeping. "They promised me freedom. They promised me food for my children if I gave you up." His words tore through the warrior's chest. She wanted to rage, to strike him down, but she only whispered, "Broken. This is the price of trust." The human pulled her arm, dragging her into the shadows. "We can't fight them here." "Not yet," he said. Her heart roared with fury, but she followed through broken streets, through smoke and fire. The Empire's hunters closed in, their shouts echoing. They ran until their lungs burned, until every step felt like knives in their bodies, but the hunters were relentless. Every corner seemed filled with shadows, every alley with soldiers, and in the dark her doubts grew louder. "Why do you stay with me?" she hissed at the human as they crouched in a ruined stairwell. "You could escape, you could hide, they want me." "Not you." But the human shook his head, his voice unshaken. "I stay because I chose you. Not because it's easy, not because it's safe, but because I believe in you." Her breath caught in her throat. The Empire had never given her choice. Her people had never given her freedom. But here was a human who spoke of choosing, even when the price was blood and fire. And though fear gnawed at her, something else grew stronger. When the hunters cornered them at last, they stood in a courtyard of broken stone, the stars hidden by smoke. The Empire's banners burned above, their voices shouting, "Surrender, warrior, return to your chains, and the human will live." The warrior's body trembled, her scars burning, but she looked at the human, and his eyes told her everything. If she surrendered, she would lose herself forever. If she fought, they might both die. But his gaze held no fear, only trust, and trust was worth any price. She raised her voice, strong and sharp. "I will not return to chains. I will not kneel again." The human stepped beside her, unarmed but unbroken. "And if you want her, you will have to go through me." The soldiers moved in, blades flashing, rifles glowing. the courtyard filled with fire. The warrior fought with fury, every strike fueled not by loyalty but by defiance. The human moved with her, turning rubble into weapons together. They carved through the storm, but the battle left them bloodied and breathless. The hunters kept coming, wave after wave. And though they stood tall, the truth pressed heavy. They could not win every fight, not alone. The price of trust was higher than either of them had ever imagined. As the night dragged on, they slipped once more into the shadows. Alive but hunted, broken but unyielding. The warrior's body ached, her scars screaming. Yet when she looked at the human, she felt something stronger than pain. She had given him trust, and though the price was high, it had not destroyed her. It had made her free. The night of fire passed. The ruins were silent again. But silence no longer meant peace. The Empire still hunted. Its fleets circled the skies. Yet something had changed. Something the Empire could not erase with weapons or fear. The warrior stood at the edge of a cliff. Looking over the broken city, her body was tired, her scars burned. But her spirit was unbroken. Beside her, the human leaned against a stone. His face pale, but his eyes alive. They had survived the storm, though survival was never promised. And in their survival, hope had found a voice. Word of their defiance spread faster than ships could travel. Across slave camps, across battlefields, across hidden corners of the galaxy, the story grew. How the Empire's strongest warrior had lowered her armor before a human. How she had broken her chains and stood against her masters. And how a single human's trust had lit a fire across the stars. At first it was whispers. Then it became songs sung in the dark. And then banners raised in secret carrying symbols of freedom. Every chain that cracked gave courage to another. Until rebellion was no longer rumor but reality. The warrior felt the weight of it every day. She had not chosen to be a leader. Yet people looked to her now with eyes full of belief. It frightened her. It humbled her. But it also strengthened her because for the first time, she was not fighting for orders, she was fighting for choice. The human watched her closely. He saw how her voice carried when she spoke. He saw how her scars, once a mark of shame, had become proof of survival to others. "You've become their symbol," he said one evening. His voice soft. She shook her head, her silver eyes troubled. "I am no symbol. I am only a soldier." But he answered firmly, "A soldier who chose trust? That is what makes you more." His words stayed with her as days turned to weeks. As battles rose and fell, as more allies came, every choice they made carried risk. Every step forward carried loss. But still they did not kneel, and slowly, the galaxy itself began to change. One night, under the starlight, the warrior lowered her armor again. This time it was not out of weakness, not out of fear, but out of choice, out of freedom. She stood before her people, bare scars glowing in the firelight. Her voice rang out across the crowd. "This is who I am, no chains, no armor, only myself. And I will never bow again." The crowd roared, their cries shaking the air. And among them, slaves raised broken chains. Soldiers threw down their weapons. The rebellion was no longer hidden, it was alive. Burning, unstoppable. The Empire could crush cities, but it could not crush a choice once made. And now too many had chosen freedom. The human stepped beside her, his hand brushing hers. He did not need to speak. Because his presence was enough, she looked at him, her chest heavy with something new. Trust had been the beginning, but now it had grown into something greater, something that could carry them both through fire and storm. Together they lifted their eyes to the sky. The stars no longer looked cold and distant, they looked alive, waiting, ready for a new story, a story not of chains, but of choices, not of empires, but of people standing side by side. The Empire would still fight. They would still bleed, but dawn had already begun. The old order was breaking, the cracks spreading wider with every passing day. And at the center of it all stood a warrior with scars and a human with trust. Two souls who had defied the impossible. When history would remember this time, it would not speak of the Empire's power. It would speak of the moment a warrior lowered her armor before a human, of the trust that spread like fire, and of the dawn that changed the stars forever. As the first light of morning broke through the smoke, the warrior whispered to the human, her voice steady, "We began with nothing but trust." He smiled faintly, his eyes warm. And trust is enough to change everything. Above them, the stars shone brighter than ever. And for the first time, the galaxy felt less like a cage, and more like a place waiting to be free.